Hi everyone, welcome. We're down here in my wormery and I'm preparing to check in on a couple of my newer systems. They're the ones that are housing my original red wiggler worms down here in these two black trays. It's been 12 days now since we last checked in on these guys. And besides wanting to check in on the worms themselves and get them fed after 12 days, we've also got what's listed here at the very bottom of my little green information board, the stragglers. So the original red wigglers were taken out of the castings that are stored in this tray right here. And, you know, it's been over 3 weeks now, closer to 4 weeks really. And we've been attempting to bait the worms out of this material. You can see I've got the same arrangement over here, but basically the system that has the original red wiggler worms in it is right here. And you know, the other thing I've been doing periodically is aerating the material, and at the same time I'm taking the dry stuff that's out on the surface, blending it in, making the material in general a little bit, I'm assuming, uncomfortable for the worms. So hopefully they're making their way into the bait box. I thought we would maybe check to see if perhaps the castings have been evacuated over here, and if so, out comes the bait box. It's a done deal. We'll reunite them with the rest of the family. And then it's one less system taking space on my shelf. So we're going to get a glove on and we're going to get to work. Well, I guess the siren in the background is kind of appropriate, because the other thing that I've kind of got going on is a little bit of a surplus in castings. You can even see I've got some of the castings still even sitting in the tray that they were kind of in the past for whatever reason. So yeah, I've also got to come up with a way of dealing with my surplus of castings. All right, on to the work at hand. And just getting really quick, back to the aerations that I mentioned briefly earlier. The last one was only 3 days ago in here. I did it in both systems where I've got these bait boxes running. Stirring in the dry stuff from the outer edges, presumably making the overall environment a little bit less friendly to having worms in it. But I think you get the idea. The whole idea is to make them feel like they're wanting to get out of the castings. And all right, I'm just trying to get a little better view of what's going on down here. Usually I've got a bunch of worms dangling out the bottom where they still want to kind of be in the old material versus just committing to being in the new material, but now I'm not really seeing any expressing much interest in still keeping 1 foot, so to speak, in each realm. Here I think, yeah, you know, even when I aerated and tilled up both systems, the other system being in progress for a considerably shorter amount of time made me think that it was sort of in an intermediate stage. But even here, just 3 days ago when I tilled things up and stirred things around, I already kind of got that feeling like the number of worms remaining in this stuff was very low, and that by blending in dry, I'm just going to get the last of them pretty much out. And I did not see a worm. I did go through the stuff pretty thoroughly. Perhaps in the video we'll see something that I missed, but the impression I'm getting is that, yeah, one worm down here, a little tiny one. The impression I'm getting is that perhaps just looking through the stuff and pulling out the handful of worms that are still in the stuff is perhaps the way to go. Or do we just let it continue? Let's just see. We did pull out 2 little tiny worms, and in effect we've just done a complete tilling of the material, which means we can pretty much do whatever we please. Still not seeing any more worms, or am I? Every time I kind of get to that conclusive point by making a statement, I get proven wrong. So we found 3 already. Do we keep it running? I mean, I'm in no particular rush, but I wouldn't mind seeing this come to a conclusion soon. But you know what? Why don't we just leave it be? We'll save the wrap up of this thing for the next check-in. For now, I think those 3 or 4 that we pulled out a moment ago might be just an indicator of perhaps a few more that need to get caught up with the rest of the crowd. Once again, kind of like when I did the aeration in both systems just a couple days ago, I resisted the urge to check inside the bait box, and I'm going to resist the urge even further by not doing so here once again. So let's just go ahead and feed the original red wiggler worms. They're up next. A couple pairs from the freezer and a couple days worth of coffee is on the meal plan today. It's not a terribly huge feeding, especially if they start digging into that pear and like it. There is the likelihood of something like that getting consumed pretty quickly, especially when I freeze the foods that I give the worms. Sometimes stuff that hasn't been frozen seems like it takes a really long time to get started, if you will, on seeing any worm activity. But everything that I don't know, that's just based on watching stuff like potato want to continue growing down in the worm bin if it wasn't first frozen before getting fed to the worms, just sticking around for ages, and many other things that try to do the same little trick. So let's see, 12 days since we last came in. Those coffee filters that we took off at the end on both systems were marking where we last fed, which was down the middle, which is kind of my typical approach. And you might have noticed on the green board, before I get all dirty and start messing up even my clean hand, we do have some estimates for how many worms occupy these 2 bins. But naturally, when it comes time to do the haul out of the bait box from the castings collection, which we opted not to do today, there will be the addition of some more worms to the lesser populated bin number 1, which is probably where I should start usually instead of bin number 2. But from where I stand on this side of the bins, left to right, often defaults me to starting in bin number 2. But so far we've only dug up the feeding zones and counted some wormies. Nothing strikes me as leftovers. And to tell you the truth, offhand, I'm not remembering what we fed last time. Somehow just an assortment of all kinds of little cuttings of vegetables and leaves and bits and pieces of everything, sort of a smorgasbord mix. And if that's the case, if I'm correct in that, then not too surprising, a whole bunch of, like, you know, small particle type foods get eaten pretty quick. And you know, since we've got replacement coffee filters to give the worms, I wasn't really planning to give bedding today, but I did know that I had the opportunity to give them at least a little bit in the form of just reusing their old feeding zone indicators as sort of like a little placemat to drop in today's food. So let's give them the coffee, and we'll just set the filters aside briefly until we decide to cover up where we last fed. Usually I like to try to increase the appeal of the big pile of coffee that I'm dumping in is by just putting a little bit of worm chow in here to go with it. And before I forget, I might as well just put in a little bit of this pulverized eggshell as grit. And, well, you know, these 2 pairs, I do kind of like the idea of putting them in whole. Maybe that will provide us with a chance to encounter them still not completely eaten next time we check in here. And you know what? Since these are, you know, less than 4 weeks old, these 2 systems here, once again I'm coming over to bin number 2 to start into this just quick idea of doing a quick tilling up of the material on the outer edges Just loosening up a little bit of stuff we can cover up the feeding zone with. Everything looks pretty good. Those plastic coverings that were on that you saw us remove in the very beginning seem to be protecting the material down here pretty nicely, keeping everything damp. And you know, the coffee that we just fed them, I don't think is going to be providing much moisture. Perhaps the pear will leave a little bit of its moisture as it thaws and gets consumed. But that's okay, you know. I think the moisture level in here is pretty good, even at the very bottom. You can see how it's kind of glistening because it is kind of wet. And I think, even though we have kind of a mound in the middle where the pear is, we managed to get things pretty flat. These are pretty young systems, right? So, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of material to be able to turn to get things completely covered up. We'll just do the best we can. And I'm bringing out some of the more damp stuff from down below. You can see it's a little bit glistening here too. But there is a little bit of dry out on the surface too, so it feels good to be able to combine all the dry with the damp and kind of let every little bit of stuff in the bin have a chance at remaining damp and seeing some good worm activity. So that's it for our quick check-in. No excitement of, you know, releasing worms, reuniting the family, bringing true closure to the cocoon nursery or straggler bin. I don't even know what to think of it as. In the past I used to think of something like that as sort of a place where a lot of cocoons were probably left behind, give it time for the cocoons to hatch and let the worms get rounded up. Have I left enough time? Maybe in the back of my mind that's the reason I'm thinking that after only you know, a couple of weeks, maybe it's not been enough time, because that might not have been enough time for cocoons to hatch and the little babies to get mobile enough to figure out they want to find something more damp, end up in the bait box. So perhaps letting it go a little bit longer will yield a few babies too, right? Get ourselves rewarded for our patience. All right, everyone, that's it for our check-in with the original Red Wigglers. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.